Hi guys, hold on for a second. Before we proceed to the video, I have something very important to tell you. Professor John V. has published his new book in collaboration with Little French Media, and the title of the book is Neoliberalism, Inequality, and Authoritarianism. This book details how neoliberalism impacts the geopolitical economy in the 21st century. You can buy it from Amazon and the link is in the description. Thank you. Now let's proceed to the video.
Hello, guys. How are you? Today we have learned about a news, and if the news is true, then we can hope that it is going to be very positive. The news is that we are hoping a ceasefire between uh, Israel and Hezbollah, or you can say the state of Lebanon. And we have two guests today. Professor John Bukofis is here. He has joined us after he did a session on liberals legitimizing the far right, class warfare, and militarism. And he did it earlier in the evening, and we are thankful that he has joined us uh, again. Professor John Bukofis is a historian from Greece, and he's a critic of neoliberalism. He specializes in international political economy, and we are joined by a new guest. It is Rodrigo Bueno Lacey. How are you,
Hi,
Rodrigo?
very good. Thank you for receiving me.
Thank you. It's for the first time that you have joined us. And Rodrigo, first of all, we will take your opinion. Uh, there is a developing news that Israel and Hezbollah have agreed to a ceasefire, or you can say the state of Lebanon, that they have accepted a ceasefire with Israel on behalf of Hezbollah and all the political parties in Lebanon. So now uh, the whole world is happy. All the parties are agreeing to the ceasefire, but now we have to see uh, how if we are going to see peace in the Middle East in the future, and how it is going to impact the conflict in Gaza Strip. So, what are your views? How do you see that?
I mean, that is a very complex question. First, I would like to say that my expertise is geopolitics, and especially I am European geopolitics. I, for me, uh, I have been following this conflict from a distance, and I have always been interested in how you can analyze this conflict, and especially what the truth of this conflict, given is particularly that there has been so much propaganda around it and so much misrepresentation. So that is just to give a little bit of my background and the position from the point of departure that I take for my analysis. Now, I saw this today that there was a ceasefire. Now, nobody has a crystal ball, and it is impossible to say what will happen. From my very biased point of view, what I would say is I don't really expect Israel to adhere to the ceasefire itself. What I have read from the ceasefire, from what I've read from the ceasefire, uh, there are many loopholes that would allow Israel to continue or to resume the attacks. Now, a continuity, in any case, a continuity, and this is for me a key aspect of whatever any analysis that I would make about it, is that since the very beginning of the genocide in Gaza on the 7th of September, it has been very clear to me, and I think to anybody that has not even a very deep understanding of Israel's internal politics, that Netanyahu needs necessarily to continue the war to stay in power. No? And there is a political scenario and a political context in the country before the 7th of September that makes his position very perilous and very fragile. And that is why he has sought to deepen the conflict the genocide to begin with, and then the war in Lebanon. And they, as far as I've been able to read in the past days, they are now talking about, for example, leaving the Lebanese war stage to focus on the war with Iran. So I don't see the possibility, or I see it as a very far-fetched possibility, or perhaps as a very naive belief, to expect that Netanyahu and Israel will abide by this ceasefire. I hope they do, of course. No, I mean that would be in the best interest of anybody, all the people that are getting massacred, no, in Lebanon, of course. So I would be very much for this. I just think that seeing what we have seen, and especially given Israel's long-standing reputation for violating all sorts of agreements, no, and let's remember also that I think this is a crucial aspect. This is not Israel. No, this is also something that I am very much missing in any interpretation of the conflict. For me, who is very clearly puppeteering the entire genocide since the very beginning is the United States. No, and I think it is a mistake, a geopolitical mistake, to talk about Israel and the United States or the European Union or any actor involved in this conflict as though the borders, the boundaries that we see on maps, were actually the boundaries that order the geopolitics that we are seeing in the Middle East. I think Israel is the touchstone of a security and military global system that ultimately is puppeteered, no, by the United States. And I think that the United States uses Netanyahu and Israel very conveniently as a scapegoat to say, oh, well, look at them, they are crazy. No? They are completely out of their minds. What can we do? We are Democrats. We hope for the best. We want human rights and beauty and in the world. But these people, man, I'm Mexican, no? And I think Americans, for me, no, I cannot speak for the whole country. That's also a very nationalistic point of view that I really don't want to make. But I think it seems to me, considering the reputation of the US, which is a country in a state, in a political establishment that, as far as I see it in its history in Latin America and around the world, and in Europe too, no, does not care at all about international law and has never cared about international law. It's naked power, and they do whatever they want whenever they want it. They have no friends. You saw it now. They threaten the European Union, its closest allies in the UK, and whoever might dare to respect the International Criminal Court's ruling on this ruling that considers Netanyahu and Gallant, no, and of course, no, the boss of Hamas, because they have to look impartial. No? So they are threatened to invade the UK, who is basically the little poodle of the US establishment, the same as they were with Bush. I mean, here Starmer does not have an independent, an independent foreign policy. But that's you see my point. My point is the UK follows the US like a child, no, that looks up to the big brother. They will do whatever they want, whatever the US wants. They do everything they want, and nonetheless, the moment they fail to follow the discipline that is imposed on them, the US is absolutely willing to destroy them. They have said, we will destroy the economy of the United Kingdom. They also have, of course, the Hague Invasion Act. No, so perhaps I've said too much, but these 2 points of my analysis, in any case, I think, for me at least, are very important to take into account. One is, I don't think the ceasefire will last. I really don't think so, and I don't think so because I think that Netanyahu, who at least in Israel, is very much dependent on continuing the war and perhaps erecting himself into this great hero that manages to basically murder all Palestinians and expand Israel as much as the messianic groups that support his coalition want, no? Or he probably goes to prison, no? Because the corruption charges that are following him come from before the 7th of September. No? And I think the 7th of September was very convenient actually for him, because he gave him the opportunity to rally around this flag of nationalism, no? And follow a project that allows him to try to deviate attention from the long tail of corruption that he carries with him. So that is one thing. And the second thing is that we cannot be naive and believe that really is Israel only. No, there are gas projects, a massive gas project, a massive investment and infrastructure project, the Abraham Accords that were basically hammered to the T's before the 7th of October, from which are accords on which energy supplies to the European Union depend, no, and supplies accords, sorry, that geopolitically are crucial for the United States to become, because they see it as a way to creating a geopolitical counterweight in a region that otherwise they see would be lost to the emerging powers of China and India, no, and the rising geopolitical West. So yeah, that's what I would at least initially have to say. Oh, it may,
Okay, first of all, I wanna welcome you, Rodrigo,
thank you.
and I wanna point out that indeed the substance of your comments is very valid. Um, there is a long-standing um policy on the part of Israel going back to the 1950s with the second prime minister of Israel, um, uh, and in 1955, in fact, Sharet, Prime Minister Sharet, Moshe Sharet, who was keeping a diary, and in the diary at the time, he wrote that Moshe Dayan, who was at that time um, the chief of staff for the army, had laid out a plan that the government had accepted, basically calling for either the installation of a puppet regime in Beirut, Lebanon, or literally buying someone off if they weren't able to do that, and then annexing southern Lebanon from the Litani River north. So the fact is that the um, greater Israel policy is not now. It's a long-standing policy of the Zionist state. It transcends political parties. And this, as you rightly pointed out, this particular prime minister, just by coincidence, does have legal problems, as you said. The fact is that if this had not come up, if this had not taken place, he would have probably been in prison. And there have been many writers from different parts of the world that have indeed written about that. That this man is using this to rally, to have the people, to mobilize the popular support around the flag, to have the people rally around this, while committing genocide according to the International Criminal Court. Again, which, as you rightly pointed out, a country like the United Kingdom, very faithful, truly faithful to the United States ever since its demise in World War II, because it was shattered. Although the Axis powers won, England was shattered. It was completely dependent on the United States. In fact, they proposed um, I can't remember if it was the FDR administration or the Truman administration, that that they continue to act as the front country for the Middle East on behalf of the United States. And I think it was Truman, and right before the Truman Doctrine. And the Americans rejected this. They said, no, no, we'll do this thing ourselves directly. They have been faithful. And yet, on this one issue, which is abiding by international law, by the will of the ICC, they immediately, you have Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina immediately coming out and saying, we're going to punish you. We're
Yeah,
going to punish you economically. I mean, I could understand this if it were, you know, some, if it were Iran, let's say, yeah, of course, it's rhetoric because it's Iran and itself, but it's the UK. So it's completely absurd to hear a US senator um, go on television and utter these things about a faithful ally. And as you rightly said, there is no country more faithful in Europe than the Brits. I mean, than the UK. The UK has been right there with them all along. And here, this is what they do. I agree that you have every right to be skeptical with regard to the will they keep this agreement. The modality of the agreement is such it's a 2 month agreement. They did it delivered. They wouldn't accept a permanent agreement. So they figured 60 days, give us 60 days. We'll see. I just read, just before coming on, I read in Al Jazeera, there was an article about international government reaction. And the most pessimistic scenario of all the governments, from China to France to the United States, of all the governments, the most pessimistic scenario was presented by the Israelis. Everybody else was hoping, was saying, well, we'll hope this works out. Let's see how it works out. Let's get behind this. Even Iran was,
Yeah.
even Iran was, and here these people. Well, by the way, if they deviate, we'll have the right, just as you said, we'll have the right to come in. In other words, it's like they're itching to go back in. And every human being on this planet who follows these events with some modicum of rationality observes this and says, wait a minute, are these people actually going to observe this? Because they have a history of violating international law and agreements, bilateral agreements. This one, of course, was multilateral. The French, the British, not the British, the French, the Americans, and the Israelis were, and behind the scenes, there were the Saudis were, of course, are very influential in Lebanon. And they got this thing together. My God, it was sweating. They were sweating to get this out. Um, Partly, by the way, for their own reasons. I mean, they have the IDF has its own problems, and the most the kindest thing they had to say, well, now the prime minister's office, well, now we can perhaps focus on strengthening what we're doing in Gaza, meaning genocide.
Exactly.
it's, it's so it's just mind-boggling. It's as though there is Israel on this planet, the United States, by the way, and we'll talk more about that. That's a good point that you made about the U.S. as the puppeteer. The United States behind it, and of course, a number of Western countries, and then the rest of the planet. The rest of the planet. So we got 8 billion people on this planet, and we have a handful destabilizing the entire region, causing a ripple effect to the economy, because this has inflationary impact globally, combined with that other war up there in Ukraine. So this is completely irresponsible conduct. And I understand there are corporations making money, a number of corporations doing business, selling weapons, not just to the Israelis, but everybody else gets tense, so they buy more weapons. And the U.S. is constantly pushing, raise your defense budgets. Trump's already announced he's going to ask allies to raise their defense budget. So I understand, okay, so there's the problem. But this perpetual destabilization policy toward the Middle East, behind which is the United States using Israel as the puppet, is it.
I mean, I completely agree with this. Yeah, it's for me. It's I think there is. I mean, what you said, for example, is also very interesting about Iran. No, I think that is something that I'm missing a lot, and that is very important. That the war in Ukraine and in Iran are, for me, part of the same. No, and I think many people see it, and definitely should start seeing it as it is a massive, unspoken world war. No, we are already in World War III since
Yes.
probably October the and for me it is mind blowing that many people keep talking about these events as though they were separated. No? When, for example, one of the turns of the war in Ukraine was or happened when the Iranian assistance, especially with drones, started to arrive to the country. No? That gave an enormous boost to the Russian forces simply because it was a technology that the conventional and very shiny but useless weapons of NATO did not know what to do with. No, they are blowing up these tanks that cost these German tanks or American tanks that cost what 60, 70 million dollars with drones that cost 2,000 euros each. So the same is happening in Yemen. So it's a completely no. And the way I see it is, I mean, if you listen to some statements, there was an article for me that was very eye-opening. I don't know if you know Pepe Escobar, that
I've heard,
geopolitical
I've heard of
not very famous, but one of the underground excellent geopolitical commentators. And he had a column in the Cradle, this I think Middle Eastern specialized review, where he quoted an Israeli officer that was quoted by somebody else, an intelligence officer from the US, saying we are going for the world war. No, for us, Gaza, all the horrors we are doing in Gaza don't matter, because once the world war comes, nobody will remember this. It will be a speck, a little nothing in a much massive carnage, which will that's what will matter. This is the big picture we are envisioning, no? And I think it's going very bad for them. No, you see it in the Israeli army. What you were, for example, that's something very interesting about this ceasefire. That I think, if you check the fatalities of the Israeli army at the border, what I heard, for example, that Scott Ritter was saying in the last weeks was that they have probably lost around 5,000 soldiers, 4,000, 5,000 soldiers between injured and dead, no, which is an enormous number for the Israeli army, which is used to quickly enter a terrain or a conflict and then go out and win, and that's it. No, there is all this information about deserters, no, Israelis that are simply not responding the calls of the
yes.
conscription calls.
That yeah, that
I think that's crucial. For example, that's something that we're not hearing now. Is I think that even if the Israelis were the Israeli elite controlling the army and they were mad enough to continue this war, I think that for the first time, that I think that there is a kind of coup from the military, no, at least in terms of disobedience, already brewing, no. And I think,
yeah.
of course, that was a major conflict with Galant that they had in Israel, no,
Mm,
that
yes.
ultimately led to him being fired from the cabinet of Netanyahu. So I mean, the 2 points I wanted to make in any case is that I do think there is an absolute madness in the terms what you were perhaps I don't know if that's what you were pointing at, no, but a madness in the perceptions of the people leading this conflict, particularly the US, the European allies that I think have lost their minds now because they don't see that if war comes, it will destroy Europe, and that to them, to Europe, this will be devastating, and that for the US, Europe is really, they don't care. No, I think as far as I see the arms corporations and people like Lindsey Graham or the American senators, they don't care. If Europe becomes a wasteland of nuclear Armageddon, as long as they make enough money to buy another yacht for their children, no, I don't think they care. And I don't think Europeans see that. I think Europeans have this misperception that they are uh, a central part of the West and that they are part of this great alliance. And I think, man, for the US has no allies, and the US barely cares about its own citizens. Why do you care? They care. Why do you think they
Yeah,
care about? No,
that's exactly right. The United States, the fact is that the United States has in far-reaching structural problems with a poverty rate of 12%, rising inequality, declining social programs, and rising defense expenditures, while the public debt has reached new highs and it is expected to go even higher against the background of China's continued inroads with its BRICS group and the uh, Belt and Road Initiative, which is designed for global economic integration. The meeting down in Peru recently was another example of Biden going there and offering nothing, Xi Jinping going there and finalizing the deal on the port in Peru. So what we have here is regrettably um, the decline of the West and the elites in the Western world desperately cleaning for a variety of reasons from ideological. Some of that is race based, by the way. Some of that is race based, without a doubt. No matter what they say with regard to trying to hide behind identity politics, they can't hide behind identity politics. The fact is, people are not around the world. There, again, we have 8 billion people on the planet, and most are in the global south. When they looked at, because the war in Ukraine, by the way, and I'm glad you pointed out that these two things are interrelated, because they, of course, they're interrelated, because the United States is behind, and the West, the NATO countries and the G7 are behind this. Um, and they are interrelated, and they do have to do with the uneasiness that the West feels as the transatlantic bloc is in steady decline. It has been for some time, especially after the Great Recession of 2008, where China comes in and provides massive stimulus, including buying the paper bonds, in other words, from U.S. treasuries to to strengthen the dollar to shore up their economy. And they knew it. By the time that Barack Obama uh, is about to leave office, he made this speech. It was at the time that Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. He said, we can't allow them, meaning the Chinese, uh, to determine the rules of international conduct and the balance of power and the terms of trade. We have to keep it here. Well, we have seen what first Northwest Europe and then the United States have done in managing the world, how they have behaved toward the global south, from Latin America to Africa to Asia. There is a long record of all this. And these two wars expose the hypocrisy. The one word that a lot of people in the global south used was hypocrisy. As you know, when South Africa brought the case before the ICC, because South Africa had, of course, was an apartheid state, and they can understand. They have a history before Nelson Mandela with apartheid. They brought this case. They brought out the hypocrisy of the West. You have the Ukrainians. Okay, you look at the war from the Ukrainian, from the victim's point of view. You have another war in Gaza. You look at it from the point of view of the Zionist aggressor committing genocide, and the victims are terrorists. When in fact the statistics that the UN has verified are 70, or roughly 70% of the victims are children and women. And the international observers are from all over the world, from India, from Italy. Albanese has done an excellent job pointing out some of the hypocrisy. So this is the, like I said, to me, having, I mean, coming from a background of a historian and looking at how empires have behaved in the past, it is amazing that they actually believe that they can hide in the age of technology when everything is recorded and videotaped and photographed. And even people in the United States know what is going on because, and you look at the result of the elections the other day. It's not that Trump won. They swept the House of Representatives. They swept the Senate. They threw them out because they had a forever war doctrine that they followed in both of those. There are diplomatic solutions they could have followed. Forever war in one area, forever war. And as you said, yeah, we are in a setting of um, World War III. The preconditions are all there. The regionally, this is the foundation is right there. All they have to do is push the button. And recently, of course, they have been forcing the Kremlin to go that far to say, okay, and the Kremlin is sending signals. Okay, we're gonna test this hypersonic missile. No warhead yet, but we're gonna test it just to show you. And still, they go, okay, we're still gonna go the next step. That's the problem that I can't. I mean, the only thing I can think of is this great Dutch scholar of the interwar period, Johann Huizinga, who lived unfortunately in the time of Hitler and Mussolini, who brilliantly concluded that the elites, when they feel pressured and squeezed that they will lose their privileged position, they get behind authoritarian regimes, far right in his case back then, the totalitarian regimes, and they will support anything just as long as you said, just so they can make some money, so they can get the yacht for their children. Um, Again, it calls into question human values. It calls into question the whole meaning of human existence. They're willing to sacrifice millions of people, millions of people, for what? For a yacht?
I
That's
mean, yeah, this is exactly this. For me, is the. I mean, I would say the madness, but what you're saying exactly this situation that you are describing. No, for me, it's more. I don't know if what is the right word to describe this. No, but I was not. I am 39 years old. No, I was not. I did not experience the World War. I was born in '85. I was too young. But what I've read and from what I know about the Cuban Missile Crisis and the latent threat of nuclear war, the shows, no, some movies that apparently there was a movie called The Day After or something like this that made
I've
Reagan.
seen, I've seen it.
Yeah,
I've seen it.
I
Yeah.
heard, for example, was reading the other day a very interesting article saying actually Reagan, who was very hawkish about the
Yes.
military, he watched that movie and immediately was like, "Whoa, man, maybe we shouldn't be that hawkish when it comes to nuclear weapons," and that led to non-proliferation agreements. Now, I don't see, other than independent social media, the obscure blogs very, I mean, look at the experts everywhere, the experts, the people that really know what's happening, or the people that really dare to speak. They have been relegated to the corners of the internet, to the farthest corners. But mainstream media talks about what Taylor Swift's latest outfit. No, I mean, God bless Taylor Swift, I have nothing against these people, but why am I being pushed this banality when, as you say, no, they are poking Russia, which has already how many times, no, redefined its nuclear strategy to basically make the very simple point: look, you keep pushing it, and we will have to deploy either nuclear weapons or these new hypersonic weapons that, given the speed and the way they operate, no technicalities that I'm not any expert in, but we know that they could be equivalent in force and destruction to that of a nuclear warhead. No,
Yes, yes.
and that is for me the absolutely apocalyptic madness is, especially from Europeans, because I understand Americans might be crazy, no, but Europeans that are the closest to these bombs flying over their city. I mean, just imagine that today they miscalculate and the Russians say, you know what, enough is enough. So we will destroy Amsterdam. As actually one Russian general suggested not long ago. He said, why we could bomb the Netherlands, no, an important capital, an important financial center, an important oil and distribution center given the ports. Imagine tomorrow Amsterdam stops existing, Rotterdam stops existing, London, because they are using British missiles. No, the Ukrainian army is using British missiles that need to be operated by NATO, American, and British
Yeah,
soldiers.
yeah.
Imagine tomorrow London, 11% of the British, where British 11% of the British economy GDP comes from. One of the oldest cities, one of the most symbolic cities of Europe, simply stops existing, and that they are playing with this. To me, it is more than it's. I mean, it's so unreal. It's hard to believe, no? And perhaps that's why there is so little discussion about this. But the fact that it's so in the media that people are not discussing it, that not even that this propaganda machinery in itself is not realizing that it is peddling its own destruction, no? Is so
That's a good point. It is peddling its own destruction, by the way. The
indeed,
media,
yeah.
which is corporate, is peddling its own destruction.
Exactly, because I mean, Will, I've read. I don't know if there's a book, a very recent book by a very interesting journalist, an American journalist that interviewed all the experts in nuclear warfare. Annie, I don't remember her last name, but she's in many she has been many in many interviews recently, and her story, or the story that she's interested in telling, is very simple. She says the moment there is nuclear warfare, hundreds of millions of people die in a question of 72 minutes, which is, I mean, no, the script of a dystopia, and probably as a consequence of a nuclear winter, which destroys the climate, 60% of humanity, no, billions perish within the next months.
Yeah,
And this is the end of civilization. This
yeah.
is the end of civilization, and it's
Yeah.
madness, you know.
It's complete madness. And in fact, in the 1960s, after you mentioned earlier the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that was a very close one. And Nikita Khrushchev and John Kennedy did come to an understanding. The Americans quietly pulled out some warheads out of Turkey, and the Russians uh, retreated from Cuba. Um, but in the aftermath, they developed a doctrine, a nuclear doctrine called MAD, Mutual Assured Destruction. And Buck McNamara was Kennedy's back then. He was an executive from up in Detroit, I think, from either Ford or General Motors. They had gotten him to head the Defense Department. And Bob McNamara, of course, had to deal with the Vietnam War. That was unfortunately, his legacy. But he recognized that you can't win a nuclear war.
Yeah.
And that's one thing you recognize. The second thing you recognize, this is back in the 60s, that the other side had enough nuclear warheads to blow up the U.S. 10 times over. So today they got the Russians have about 400 or 500 nuclear warheads more than the U.S. Doesn't matter because they have overcapacity, and it's ridiculous to even talk about because Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the nuclear bomb, correctly concluded especially in his conversation with Albert Einstein, that this is a weapon not to be used. And if it is used, it's going to be used against civilians. And of course, it was. The Americans used it in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the the idea that we have gotten to the point where mainstream media has articles about nukes, about nuclear weapons being considered. And there are articles, especially in the Western media, of how to protect yourself. Um,
Yes.
you can't protect yourself. I mean, when Edward Teller developed the hydrogen bomb in the 1950s, he was well known, and of course, the rest of us found out later that it was 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb they used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was 1950s, by the way. They have tactical nuclear warheads today that are extremely powerful. As you said about, unfortunately, knock on wood, nothing like that is going to happen about the Russians, accidentally. And accidents are in fact what it's all about, because accidents can happen, and there there are fail-safe mechanisms to make sure that we don't go nuclear. And I've been watching what the Kremlin has been saying, and the Defense Department, the DoD in Washington, and they're saying, well, if you cross the line, we're going to have to reconsider it. Um, and they do consider the fact that there are Brits operating the new missiles, the ballistic missiles, and Americans operating the new missiles that they sent, because they have to have the technical knowledge to do that, and the Ukrainians don't have it. So that's essentially what, and this goes back to the point you made about World War III. So essentially, what you have is this proxy war becoming more, which is proxy indirect. In other words, it's becoming more and more direct, because now you have personnel. By the way, they were always there. It was just they were not in that kind of um, visible role. So now ballistic missiles. Okay, we're going to hit that city. We're going to hit this city. Um, and do damage to their oil refineries and strategic targets and so forth. And the question is, what if there is a decision to hit a civilian target, purely a civilian target, just like the US decided on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Then the Russians will have no choice. They will have to push the button. And then they will have to decide where they hit first. Okay. We
Yeah.
obviously pray and hope nothing like this will ever happen, because it is a nightmare scenario. And the reason, and this is what drove Robert Oppenheimer crazy and filled with regret and alienated, that he knew that this gets out of hand, that these things have a dynamic of their own, and they push the button, the other side pushes the button, and all of a sudden, it's it's
Yeah.
nuclear winter.
Indeed. Yeah. I think this is a process that indeed once it's set in motion, it's
Yeah.
done. No, I mean that is what is so, I mean, in a way incomprehensible about it. But perhaps when you see the people in power, no, I mean, we don't even run who's running things either. I mean, in the US, across Europe, and especially across Western Europe, it is obvious that they follow the line given by the US and by the State Department. But who is running the US? Nobody knows. That is a question that, for example, has I've been obsessed with for the last year. I mean, since the genocide started, and I haven't found anybody, no, that has a clear answer. Of course, it's Joe Biden and his administration, but I mean, Joe Biden is basically fried.
No,
No,
Joe Biden is an intermediary. The
exactly.
Joe Biden is an intermediary. There are tangible interests, the lobby interests, which represent corporate interests.
Yeah.
There is the military industrial complex. There are many on Wall Street that have an interest. Um, I mean, as a historian, I think of how the US, the American people, by a vast majority, according to news public opinion polls, in 1916, when World War One, which was called the Great War, obviously they didn't expect a second one, but when World War One was already ongoing, and there were those warmongers, especially in the American press and in the on Wall Street, that wanted to go to war because there were huge profits to be made, and Wall Street banks had extended loans to
Mm.
the French and the British primarily, much less to the Germans. So they wanted to go to war, but on the side of France and Britain to recoup their loans. And the Secretary of State to Woodrow Wilson, uh, William Jennings Bryan, went to him and said, "I understand you want to run for re-election, and I understand why you don't want to get into the war, but you know what? Wall Street wants war."
Yeah.
He said, "So what? I'm the president." He said, "They control the press. They will paint a picture of you
Mhm.
to the degree that you won't be able to win the election. Your opponent, who's already saying that you are going to get this country into war when the American people don't want you to get the country to war, your opponent is going to win. So what do you want to do?" So he struck a deal with Wall Street to support, to go into the war, while telling the American people going to the election, "Oh, I'm for peace." And then right after he won the election, he went to war.
Yeah.
So the fact is that I mean, it's not an auto worker, it's not some farmer out in Wyoming. It's very powerful people that have policy input. And these powerful people, I am afraid, have converging interests with the Zionist regime that's committing genocide because their profits rise, as well as with the Ukrainian regime when there are diplomatic solutions, and the world is crying out for diplomatic solutions. Xi Jinping has peace proposals on the table, and they ignore them, um, knowing that the peace proposals are not necessarily China's interest. They're in the interest of stability, but destabilization, whether in the Middle East or Ukraine,
Mhm.
serves their interests.
I fully agree. And then on one point, I would like to that you mentioned this convergence of interests. No, I think that is, for me, that is because that I in the end I think that's who's running the whole thing. No, which is, and I think that is the single most threatening aspect of all. Once you realize, no, once you think about what the actors you mentioned, Wall Street, the military industrial complex, no, the big five, no, Raytheon, Northrop, Grumman, Boeing, no, then you have, of course, the APAC, which is, no, the Israeli lobby in the US, which is very much related to the arms industries. So it is this collection of converging interests, CEOs trying to maximize the profits for their stakeholders. And I think that's exactly when I get scared, no, that this convergence of interest is functional and leads to war and increasing war. And as we saw in Afghanistan, no, like everybody lost in Afghanistan except for the war machine, except for the military industrial complex. No, they, and
They
that's
made
it.
money. They made money.
Exactly. They made money. No, everybody died. Even American soldiers died. Afghan, I don't know how many Afghan got either died, got mutilated, got their life destroyed. But that's the thing. I don't think that all these converging interests, they have a more long-term view than making the most immediate profit. And I think that's a scary thing, that they
They
are going
don't.
to blow up the world just to make a few extra bucks without even realizing it, I think. No? So
I
my
agree. I agree entirely. That's exactly how they, because corporations have quarterly profit reports and they report in the stock market. So they look at the quarterly profit. They have a short term. This is not Japan and China that they look down the road 10, 15, 20 years. They don't have a long term horizon. This is unlike the central planning of Beijing. They don't
Mhm.
have that kind. They don't think like that.
Yeah,
Even
entire.
the great John Maynard Keynes, who was a critic of capitalism, the way it was operating, uh, but of course wanted to strengthen capitalism, in New Deal economics, which was adopted in a number of countries in various forms, recognized that these people are self-destructive
Mm.
and that they have this proclivity to look at short term. There is, and unfortunately, um, the short term thinking having a lot of victims along the way. This
Yeah,
short term thinking of, I'm going to make my short term profits. In the meantime, 44,000 plus people in Gaza have been killed. And as the Palestinian representative of the United Nations has stated, we don't know if it's 44,000. There may be a lot more buried under those hospitals that were never
found.
found
I
under
think
school.
we're going to
We
be
don't
locked
know how many
there.
there. We don't know.
Yeah. No, there is
We
this
may find out
humanitarian.
it's a lot more.
Ralph Nader is one of the in the U.S. one of the leading
Yes.
humanitarian activists concerned with this miscount. No, he estimated the same as the Lancet back in March, I think April, that it was around 200,000 casualties, and that is a conservative estimate. And he said by September, he said probably 350,000, and he estimated by the end of this year, a conservative estimate would be 600,000. No, it is
Yeah. It's
so.
definitely a lot more, by the way. It's definitely a lot more. There
Yeah.
are a lot of bodies they have not found. We know for a fact that there have been mass graves. That's something that's known. So and I don't want to be morbid about this. I mean, the ICC has rendered its decision. The world has reacted the way it has. Most of the world is respecting it. Even allies of the United States and Israel, like the UK, they're saying, wait a minute, yeah, we are with Israel, but however, we got to respect international law. My God, I give them credit for that. But the United States is standing steadfastly behind this. And that's, Rodrigo, the worst thing about all this that bothers me, having lived in the United States for decades. Um, is that then they turn around. The many politicians, uh, media, analysts, and they insist that the United States is the model democracy of the world that the rest of the world must emulate.
Yeah.
That's what bothers me. In other
Yeah.
words, if
But
they just said nothing, I would be happy. But but for God's sakes, to tell the world as though the world is completely blind and deaf and can't see the evidence in the age of technology before it. You're asking the world to suspend reality for the myth you're selling.
yeah, this is, I think, this lack of awareness about this, exactly what you have repeated several times, is one of the most incredible aspects of the implosion of the empire. That, in fact, I really, it is hard to believe they don't realize, no, that they have lost the war of representation, no, that their propaganda of misrepresenting what they do with this virtuous rhetoric of being the indispensable country, the only democracy, that this nonsense repeated by Sky News, by the Rupert Murdoch empire, no, by mainstream media, no, as you say, no, who believes this? No, you have to be brain dead to believe this. No, I mean, especially with social media. My God, the new generations don't watch any of this at all. No, like all young people watch the carnage, no, completely unedited. So what are you going to tell them, that you're good? And so for me, it also shows the rottenness of an entire propagandistic strategy on which they relied, that was very effective for them. No, and I think that is also the most concerning. I think that you see, for example, Netanyahu saying towards the ICC, "Oh, it's anti-Semitic," which, besides being predictably laughable, no, laughably predictable, no, which is like, I mean, everybody's Hamas, everybody is anti-Semitic. The Pope was anti-Semitic, and Hamas
Yeah.
too, no.
Oh, I could.
I mean,
When I saw the thing with the Pope, I couldn't believe it. I'm thinking they're going after the Pope. I couldn't
you
believe.
cannot even get mad at this. It's
No,
so
but
ridiculous.
even if you believe it, you don't do it because it's the Pope.
Exactly. and and I think for me that's when I no, the penny dropped, that I thought, I mean, much earlier than this, but that you think this really vulgar, simplistic, brainless way of propaganda, that's really all they have, and that's really all they always had. That's as clever as these people, these Mossad intelligence services, these great machines of military complexes and surveillance intelligence. That's what they have, this simplistic, childish, juvenile way of lying to the world. And once they lost it, instead of coming up with something new, perhaps honesty, as you said, no, perhaps they could be honest. No, they keep trying and trying, even though it's obvious, even I suppose to them, that it doesn't work, but it's a way, perhaps it's a way for them to show power. Now, to say, look, we know the world doesn't look like this, but we are going to impose this worldview. And as in Germany, as in the Netherlands, as in France, I believe, you don't agree with the worldview, you go out and protest with your kefiyeh, we're going to beat you up to a pulp.
I did want to invite you to please have some concluding remarks with regard to this topic. Where do you see this going? Whether you believe, as some have suggested, in some of the Gulf states, including in Jordan and Egypt, that perhaps the next place to have ceasefire would be Gaza, as the United Nations Security Council has called for, and obviously the vast majority of the governments around the world. So, any concluding remarks with regard to all of this?
I mean, I would like to be optimistic. I usually am very pessimistic, not because I want to, but because I think that's where the only thing that the evidence warrants to this point. And I think that, as you also mentioned, no, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So if I had to predict something with my crystal ball, would be, I don't believe there will be a ceasefire. I think, unfortunately, this. I think Israel, and by the Israel I mean especially the elite, has many incentives to continue this conflict, unless there are many balls in the air that we don't know. For example, what you mentioned, Jordan, no, the discontent, the division between the population and the government is growing, the same as in Egypt. I mean, they know that they are basically colonies of the United States, and that they are doing the bidding. The populations are very aware, and this is causing an enormous amount of discontent, considering that the revolutions, the Arab Spring was not long ago. I wonder how much of that seed or that fire could still.
Excellent point. Excellent point.
I really,
I applaud you.
this is something that I really wonder. In Europe, it's the same. I mean, Europe is going to absolute many countries, Germany, the Netherlands, openly to dictatorial laws, no, criminalizing every single Palestinian show of solidarity or criticism of Israel, which is no a legal setting, a legal precedent to basically prohibit any criticism of the government, which is the point. So I suppose, and it's the same. The deal in Europe, the same as the deal in Jordan or much of the Middle East, is accept the imposition, this dictatorial imposition, with a differential degree of violence. In the case of the Palestinians, they get the worst deal: is either die, no, or live like a slave, or live like Smotrich said, no, where their options. In Europe is no different. In Europe is the same: is accept our boot on your neck from now on, or mass mobilization, no, a form of resistance that in most of Western Europe has entirely disappeared for the past 70 years. So I wonder if these generations will be able, not only because it's difficult, but because the surveillance and security state and police state has never been as strong as it is today, no? uh, I My prediction would be that unless there is some sort of mass mobilization, both in Europe and in the Middle East, a revolution, no, so some counterweight that counters power, military and political power with power, because I think there's not power is this kind of naked fascistic power only negotiates with that kind of naked power. It does not respect arguments. It only respects
Yeah.
power itself as a counter argument. And it might come in the form of revolutions and toppling these dictatorial governments and these colonial governments in the Middle East. No, it might come through a devastating attack on Israel by Iran, which is, I think, very likely still. Although it might be devastating to Iran too, into the end, it might ignite the entire Middle East, no, and devastate economically Europe and perhaps much of the West, what it is
Yeah,
called.
much of the West, much of the West.
So I think that would be my concluding remark. I think people everywhere that are somehow differentially affected by this conflict have two choices: mass mobilization and mass resistance to the degree that it is necessary. No, in Europe it would be mass street mobilization, mass pressure on their governments. No, hundreds of thousands of people going on the streets, unfortunately confronting the riot police if necessary, not violently, but at least with their presence, to say we are here in spite of this demonstration being illegal, as they are trying to illegalize it in Germany and in the Netherlands, for example. No, and I think in the Middle East will be the same. Uh, the populations themselves toppling the governments, confronting the governments, perhaps also through mass mobilization, if not by something stronger. And that's the only way I see, unless there's some freak accident like a coup d'etat in Israel. But at the same time, the thing in Israel is I don't have any expectation that anything will change, because who
Yeah.
follows? All of
That,
them. I mean, Netanyahu, man, all of them are very similar. If you think the other guys are cool, no, I think they are as mad as him. They might talk nicer. That's all. No.
yeah, I agree entirely with you on both counts. A, there is a rising trend of authoritarianism behind the thin veil of liberal democracy throughout the Western world, when in fact both the foreign policy of militarism as well as the domestic policy of suppression, and in order to induce consent with the policy of the government, whether it has to do with cuts in social services or pensions, or whether it has to do with supporting militarism. I think that this is a Western wide trend, and it is not an accident that right wing movements and political parties have emerged, especially in the last 25 years, and they're continuing to make inroads. And they have replaced the traditional conservative now it has become the norm, it's become mainstream to be like Trump, Victor Orban, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. So it's now, Modi in India. So
Yeah.
you have this rise of authoritarianism as part of the mainstream norm, with the media presenting it as such, as though there's nothing wrong, and then distracting the masses with what is her name, Taylor Swift, who is, I'm sure, a fine lady, but the fact is, it's not her fault. She's being used as a they commoditize everything in any, they commoditize creativity, commoditize everything, and for their own goals. And the other point you made, I also agree with you entirely, which is the mass mobilization, the grassroots organizing. Unless you have a counter force to the madness of this tiny percent of the population on this planet owning most of the assets. The other day, as I was preparing to do a presentation on authoritarianism, I know I was looking up some statistics, and I'm not sure what the sort, if it was the Pew Research Center or the IMF, but 1% of the world's population owns 43% of the entire wealth, which means that the rest, by the way, from the rest, you have to subtract. In fact, the study did subtract, and I forget what the percentage,
Yeah.
subtract for what governments use and, in the public sector. And then the rest, what was left over from that, was for everybody else, the 99%. And to make it even worse, then they broke it down to the richest 2,668 people owning 13%
Mm.
of the entire of the wealth, which is roughly $13 trillion of the planet. And the and you have rising inequality along with rising militarism and rising authoritarianism, um, while this is happening, while you have rising wealth, capital accumulation, and
Yes.
concentration, and one has to wonder what is this, what is this headed in terms of a viable social contract for a society looking for equilibrium and harmony. I mean, human beings, by the way, don't live forever. I don't know if people out there believe that there's a short span. They live, and then they're gone. As John Maynard Keynes said, in the long,
Yeah.
when they told him in the long term we'll all be dead. Um, it's just amazing to look at what the long term horizon for a viable society is for these destructive elites. And I'm very glad, by the way, that you use when you reference the media, that they are self-destructive. These are self-destructive people. And I'm not optimistic either. I want to be optimistic. My daughter keeps telling me I am optimistic, but I'm not. Uh, I want to
I-
be optimistic.
my optimism is in the people, in the people from below, no, and the people to realize that they have more power than they have been told they do. No,
Yes, excellent point.
I,
Excellent point.
I would say
An
my
excellent
optimism
point.
is in that.
They have power, but they have been convinced by the media and the elites, the establishment, that they don't, that power is
Yes.
not with them.
Yeah, it is, I think, a very discouraging, massively psychologically devastating thing to be told
Yes,
all the time, you have no power. Look at our armies, look at these cops, look at all we have. You
yes,
have nothing. No?
yeah,
And I think people unfortunately have believed this story. No? In Europe, I think this was also came together with wealth that got people comfortable enough,
Yes.
no,
Hmm.
to confuse wealth with freedom and forget
Yes.
about
Yes.
asking for more freedom. And now that the wealth is going, they also see, ah, well, freedom was never really there, no. And
No. Yeah.
I don't think it is a good choice. I think it is. These are going to be very difficult times to live for me and for everybody alive, not only for young people, because it's not a nice choice to have to accept oppression or resist. Resistance is very difficult. No.
Resistance is very difficult. It is very difficult, and it's very difficult. It takes quite a bit for human beings to get out of their homes and out of their jobs and go out in the street. You have to be really dispirited and rather alienated and pessimistic to go that far. But that's where it's headed. That's where it's headed.
Yeah.
That the status quo is has made is authoritarian. It has made authoritarianism the norm. And the question is, how long? I mean, the next great recession, like the one of 2008, and the one of 2008, the Chinese did bail out quite a few. And they bailed, first of all, they bailed out themselves. The state bailed out their own company. And then they reached out to their trading partners and provided some cushion. And still, it was horrible. That was a horrible recession, as President Obama pointed out 4 years after, because he was elected the year of the recession, 2008. He said, most of the benefits have accrued to the richest 1%. I don't see the benefits of the recovery going to the rest of the population. So the next recession, when it's going to hit, and it's going to hit hard,
Yeah.
may drive people out of their homes and say, okay, enough is enough. We got to do something to take our fate in our own hands, because there is no choice. Um, anyway,
I completely agree
I
with you.
am
I completely.
delighted, by the way, to that I had this conversation with you. You're a
Oh,
great guy. You're a great
thank you very
guy.
much. Same thing, same wise. No, it was a pleasure to meet John.
I'm
I mean,
delighted
pleasure
that we
meeting you
had
and
this
talking to you. Really.
conversation. We both hope, obviously, for a better world, for a more just world, social justice, which I, you know this better than I do, is trivialized by those in the establishment. But social justice merely means a humane approach to life and to society. It doesn't mean anything. Uh, it doesn't mean anything more than that. It's not an evil thing. It's a good thing. And to dismiss it is um, is I don't want to use the word immoral, but it's just devastating to humanity's sense of optimism that there are better days ahead.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, without optimism, there is no point in even being pessimistic. So,
yeah, I
really, I
yeah,
entirely.
I again, I'm very delighted to meet you. I hope we have the opportunity to cross paths again. And I am. Oh, here's Assad.
So, likewise, it was a pleasure.
Assad.
Yes. This conversation. Can you hear my voice? First of all, I
Yes.
would
Yes,
like
yes,
to.
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
This conversation has been great, and both of you have expressed your opinions on uh, all the current circumstances, the criticism of the powers to be. Now, let's hope what's for a brighter future.
Yeah.
And we request all the viewers to share their opinions there because your feedback is very precious to us, and your opinions, your comments, will encourage us to produce more content. We would like to know what you want to hear, what you want to watch. And I'm extremely thankful to both these gentlemen for their precious time, for their insightful opinions.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, and it
Thank
was a
you very
pleasure.
much.
Thank you, Asad, for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
to
you.
both of you. Thank you for the thank you to the viewers for
Thank
their precious time for watching this video and listening to this conversation. Tomorrow we are going to be back. Professor John Bukofus is going to discuss gig economy, part one. There will be a teaser first, and then we are going to have a detailed 1 hour conversation on gig economy, part one. So please stay tuned with us, and we are hopeful that we will be talking with Mr. Lacey in the future.
Yeah, it would be a pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you for your time. Bye bye.
Okay. Thank you too. Ciao, ciao.